Hey, and welcome virtual audience as well. So today is our last session, Wellness Wednesday session in with the Heart Month series for February. And this one's back to our express 30-minute session. So we'll have a quick session today on exercise snacks. And so it might not be what you think, but I will let Mr. Craig Witt, my wellness GA, talk more about that. When he first told me about this, definitely raised my eyebrows and got my attention. And so he's done a lot of research on this new concept. So he's going to be our speaker today, and you're going to tell us all about exercise snacks. So virtual audience, look for messages from McKinsey, and you can put your RFW out there and also put questions, and we'll get that from you. All right, it's all yours, Craig.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. As always, I'm so grateful to have an opportunity to come share with you all just some of the things I'm learning as a student here at the University of North Alabama. So today's topic is exercise snacks, and spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with food. What exercise snacks is, it offers a different perspective on how we obtain our exercise or physical activity throughout our daily lives. Before we talk about what exercise snacks is and how do we obtain it, how do we do them, let's first kind of briefly talk about why exercise is important and why not exercising is so bad. So the way I see it, today's lifestyles are geared towards less movement and more sitting, and subsequently fewer calories are being expended throughout the day. In addition, today's foods are infinitely cheap, infinitely abundant, and highly palatable. They taste great. So I believe the gravitational pull to indulge in these energy-dense foods is very strong. If you think about it, somebody's always bringing something yummy to work or just everywhere around us. So it is a strong gravitational pull. But consequently, over consuming these foods while sitting too long will likely result in a caloric surplus or an energy imbalance. So more about the balance. If you've got exercise and caloric restriction on one side that's not all there, you probably could be a good candidate for what's called metabolic syndrome or obesity. And that's because the regulation of metabolic pathways within the body that determine the trajectory of health is a balancing act. It's basically calories in and calories out. I truly believe losing weight is the simplest thing possible, but not the easiest. And there's a difference between simplicity and easy. There's a lot of things in life that are very simple, but they're not easy. And I believe this is a great example. So calories in, calories out. And let's talk more about what calories in is and calories out. So calories in is really the simplest one to explain. It's basically the food and drink we take in. They're from our famous Milo sweet tea that everybody enjoys, our breakfast, our lunch and dinner, and even our healthy foods that are strongly suggested. These are all our calories in. And again, that's the simplest part of the balancing being we're talking about, of calories in, calories out. Calories out is a little bit more difficult to talk about, but we're going to try. So calories out is basically four things. It's energy expenditure. It's four ways that we expend energy. One is BMR. That's our basal metabolic rate. And this really accounts for the vast majority of the calories we expend throughout the day. Now, what basal metabolic rate is basically the energy we spend just to keep the lights on. It's not what we're doing right now necessarily. It's actually best measured when we're asleep. So it's with no movement. And that's the energy it takes for our hearts to beat, our kidneys to filter, our digestive system, hormones to do what they do. The next one would be exercise. We all know that one. And this one varies as far as caloric expenditure because it depends on the intensity, the duration, or what exercise you're doing. So that one really varies. I like this next one. It's called NEAT, and it is a neat one. NEAT stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And what that is basically the energy I'm expending right now with this presentation that you're expending when you're typing, brushing our teeth, combing our hair, blinking, fidgeting is a big one. And if you'll see next to NEAT, it can be very low energy expenditure for very sedentary people. It can be up to, only like 15% of our total daily calories. But it can also be pretty high for some of us. And we all know that one person who just is always moving around or just fidgeting and pacing, and it can get up to about 50% if you're very active. And this is all caloric expenditure. Now, the last one is the thermal effect of food, and it's about 10%, and it's a pretty neat one as well. So the thermal effect of food, this is the amount of calories it takes to digest each one of these macronutrients. So if you look at fat, fat has the lowest thermal effect with about a 0 to 4%. And what that means is, for example, 100 calories from fat, we would only get about 96, 97, 98 of those calories. And if you'll see, carbohydrates has a higher thermal effect with about 5 to 15%. But look at protein. Protein has the highest thermal effect. So what that means is if we get, say, 100 calories from protein, we're only really getting about 70 or 80 of those calories because it takes so much energy just to break the protein down. So it's called the thermal effect of food. And again, those are the ways that we expend energy. So I believe that a well-crafted exercise plan is the single most potent longevity drug we have. And I also believe that exercise is the greatest forgiver for many of our younger mistakes. When we're younger, we might have stayed up a little too late, ate a bunch of stuff we shouldn't have. And so exercise is a really great forgiver of all of that. So this is the top 10 physically active nations. And if you'll notice, you've got Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Canada's on there, Australia, Japan's on there, the Netherlands, New Zealand. Now, these physically active nations, it seems like physical activity is baked into their lifestyles more, and many of these countries, and they tend to live longer than other countries. And we also know that increasing physical activity can improve health and quality of life. Regular physical activity can help reduce at least 20 chronic diseases and conditions, and provide effective treatment for many of these conditions. Do you notice what country is not on this list right here? If you guessed it, that's right. Because unfortunately, physical activity is not baked into our lifestyles here in America. And this is another thing I want to show you here. If you'll see the ruby red, these are the states that are the least physically active. And guess which one is right there in the middle? Alabama. Of course, we got all these around us too. Let's see. So what do you think is the most common or frequent type of physical inactivity, that we all share? And I'll give you a hint, we're all doing it right now. Sitting, exactly. Prolonged sitting. See, number one. So what is prolonged sitting? It has been defined as sitting uninterrupted for greater than 8 hours per day. And for every additional hour of sitting at periods longer than 7 hours, mortality is increased. So individuals sitting 10 hours a day had approximately 34% increase in mortality, even after increasing their physical activity. And that's for people who are even exercising after work. That's how bad prolonged sitting can be for us. We're going to talk more detail about that. So why is prolonged sitting so bad? Researchers aren't really sure why prolonged sitting has such harmful health consequences, but one possible explanation is that it relaxes our largest muscles, which would be our legs. When muscles relax, they take up very little glucose from the blood, raising the risk of type 2 diabetes. So this is pretty neat right here. So the dangers of prolonged sitting were first spotlighted in the early 1950s when J. Morris et al. Recognized a 2-fold increase in the risk of heart attacks in the sedentary occupation of bus drivers when compared to more bus conductors. In some of these bigger buses, they have a bus driver who sits all day, but they also have a bus conductor. And they noticed that the drivers who were sitting, they had this twofold increase in the risk of heart attacks compared to their coworkers who were walking around the buses all day instead of just sitting. And I think that's when this first really became in the spotlight. But also more recent research has shown that long periods of sedentary time may have a 147% increase in cardiovascular events and a 49% increase in just all-cause mortality. I thought this was a really neat study I got to read. So that leads us to prolonged sitting and metabolic syndrome. The reason I always like to talk about, well, there's several reasons I like to talk about metabolic syndrome, but one is because we test for this with our bio screenings that's coming up in March 20th, I believe. More will be revealed on that. But if you'll remember, metabolic syndrome is 5 criteria, and if someone has just 3 of these 5, and it could be any of these 3 we're about to talk about, that is considered metabolic syndrome. And these are not in a particular order, but central obesity is 1, and that's basically excess abdominal fat. 2 is high triglycerides, which would be considered above 150 milligrams per deciliter. And the 3rd one is low HDL. And if you'll remember, HDL is the only one of these biomarkers that we want high. The rest of these we want lower. But low HDL for females, HDL needs to be above 50 milligrams per deciliter. And for males, it needs to be above 40. 4 is fasting blood glucose, and that's basically after being fasted for 8 or plus more hours and measuring your glucose if it's more than 100 milligrams per deciliter. And then obviously high blood pressure. And again, 3 of these 5 is considered being having metabolic syndrome, and we test for these for our bio screenings that will be coming up very soon. So let's break down the dangers of prolonged sitting, and there's a lot of them. I didn't even really list, I kind of stopped with, I didn't list all of them. There was a lot. So obviously weight gain, prolonged sitting slows down our metabolism, and therefore we can gain weight. Sitting also suppresses lipoprotein lipase. This is an enzyme that removes fat from the blood and transfers it to our muscles to be used during periods of activity. And again, so sitting suppresses this enzyme. And so when we spend most of our time sitting, the activity of this enzyme right here is decreased. And this means that fat is not removed from our blood and absorbed by our muscles. Also increased cancer risk. So a German meta-analysis concluded that sitting uninterrupted for long periods of time each day were 24% more likely to develop colon cancer and had a 32% higher risk for endometrial cancer than those who sat less than 3 hours a day. Obviously, increased type 2 diabetes would be the one we're speaking of. Sitting at a desk all day impairs the body's ability to handle blood sugar, causing insulin resistance. Excess glucose builds up in the bloodstream, leading to diabetes. And this makes sense because for some of us who are prolonged sitting, we're also eating our meals or snacks or lunch. And when we eat, most of that food gets broken down into glucose. And as that glucose gets absorbed in the blood, it rises. And if we're not moving our muscles and clearing that glucose out of our blood, then we can get a lot of host of problems that we're speaking of right now. And a study published in the Journal of Diabetology found that those who sat for more than 8 hours a day had a 112% increased risk of type 2 diabetes. And I just don't find that hard to sit that long in our occupation. I really don't. I do it a lot. Increase of risk of cardiovascular disease. Sitting for too long is strongly associated with cardiovascular disease. And a study has found that men who spent more than 10 hours a week, that's not much, riding in a car or 23 hours a week watching TV had an 82 and a 64% greater risk of death due to cardiovascular disease than those who spent significantly less time on both of those activities. So a lot of this has to do with the vascular problems from prolonged sitting. So blood and fluid pooling in those areas after a long period of sitting. This is when blood clots form in deep leg veins. And this is dangerous because it can travel to the lung. And mechanistically, vascular dysfunction is related to the effect of prolonged sitting, may include disruption of nitric oxide, which is a powerful vasodilator released from endothelial cells in response to stress. So we're not releasing that nitric oxide, really opens up our veins. And if you think also, our heart pumps the blood, but by the time it reaches our toe, it's kind of hard to come back up. So the more movements we do, the more we strengthen our arteries and actually our veins, so we can bring that blood back up. This is a big one, slows down brain function. So sitting for too long may affect our brain. When we move our muscles, our heart pumps fresh blood and oxygen to the brain, which triggers the release of brain and mood enhancing chemicals. Our brain function slows when we are sedentary for long periods of time. Also, studies suggest excess sitting has been associated with an increased risk for dementia. And shorten lifespan. Sitting too much could raise the risk of death from all cause, what's called all-cause mortality. According to an American Cancer Society study, prolonged sitting time of more than 6 hours was associated with a 19% higher rate of death from all causes combined compared to sitting less than 3 hours per day. So we just talked about the problem. Now let's talk about the solution. I guess y'all know what that is, don't you? So let's talk about metabolic. There is a growing body of literature examining positive short-term effects of breaking up prolonged sitting with light intensity, which is walking, just getting up and walking around, to a more vigorous intensity activity like stair climbing. We all have access to this around here on the metabolic profile. So this is probably a little extreme of an exercise snack. I don't really suggest this one, but it's on there. And we'll talk about what exercise snacks are and how to perform some of them. So what is an exercise snack? Exercise snacking simply means doing short bursts of exercise throughout the day. A brief snippet of exercise, usually lasting 1 or 2 minutes, and indulged in often during the day. Cumulatively, these can be quite potent. The idea of exercise snacks is that rather than getting one workout meal per se, 30 to 45 minutes straight in the gym, you're breaking up that workout with several shorter exercise breaks throughout the day. So what are the benefits of exercise snacks? One major benefit for many people is that exercise snacks do not require scheduling a whole hour to go to the gym or fitting in a long workout. Exercise snacks simply calls for sneaking in a 5 to 15 minutes of fitness a few times a day, which is more doable for most people. Biggest thing is exercise snacks breaks up prolonged sitting, and I'm going to talk more about that also. So there was another study I liked. I didn't really go in depth with this on the presentation, but I really liked it. It was according to a 2019 study, college students snacked on exercise by rapidly climbing and descending 3 flights of stairs 3 times a day for 6 weeks. And they've done this in the morning, they've done it at lunchtime, and they've done it in the late afternoon. So you could see they just kind of got up, done it, and went back about their business. They did not otherwise work out at all. This is all they did. But after 6 weeks, they had gained significant amounts of both aerobic fitness and leg strength. So experimental studies have showed both light intensity walking, and we all know what that would be, like just getting up and maybe walking to Stevens Hall and back, and frequent short bouts of standing, just standing at our desk, can elicit improvements in cardiometabolic health markers compared with prolonged sitting. And this was a really good study right here. I actually read this twice. A study by Dunstan et al. Found that breaking up prolonged sitting with just 2-minute bouts of light intensity walking every 20 minutes for 5 hours has a profound result of postprandial phase. So we're going to talk more about postprandial here in just a second. That was a really good study right there. It's probably one of the first ones I read when I got interested in exercise snacks. So synthesized evidence together from a 2022 meta-analysis suggests that breaking up prolonged sitting with light intensity walking, we're just talking about just getting up and walking, exercise snacks resulted in greater improvements of postprandial glucose than frequent standing and sitting. However, short bouts of standing may elicit some improvements in postprandial glucose when compared to sitting. But it's not as good as walking, obviously. It's just better standing. When standing is better when compared to prolonged sitting, but it's not as good as walking. So why is that important? Everything we just talked about, especially with the postprandial glucose. So in the long term, the effects of regularly high amounts of postprandial blood glucose or sugar can increase our risk of many cardiometabolic diseases, such as heart disease. Researchers have found that consistently high levels of postprandial, remember postprandial is after we eat, blood glucose can increase our risk of developing heart disease, whether we have diabetes or not. In type 2 diabetes, obviously, blood sugar levels that are regularly too high can damage our body's ability to regulate blood sugar, even further increasing our risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And this goes back to if we're sitting all day, like a lot of us are with our occupations, and then we're eating lunch and we're eating our snacks, or maybe we're having a Coke or something, and that blood glucose just continuously rises, and we're not clearing it through our muscles too long. Because remember, skeletal muscle is a metabolically active organ, representing a key site for insulin-mediated glucose disposal. When we're moving, we're clearing glucose out of our blood, and that's what we need to do. We don't want that glucose to get too high in our blood. For example, skeletal muscle consumes nearly 80% of insulin-stimulated whole body glucose uptake. That's a lot. So real quick, and I won't get too mechanistically, but I really like this picture. When we're moving, and you don't necessarily have to be running, but just getting up and walking, all of these things increase, like whole body insulin sensitivity, it increases. Muscle glucose utilization, insulin sensitivity increases. Even when we just get up and walk, it just makes us more insulin sensitive, which is the opposite of what we don't want to be, which is insulin resistance. And glucose uptake also. Endurance capacity goes up, whole body energy expenditure. And where do you think that energy will come from? That right there, WAT is white adipose tissue. It's what's really mainly around our abdomens and around our organs as well. Because muscle is a metabolic sponge. Muscle just soaks glucose up. It's a sinkhole for glucose in our blood. And I've always said the more muscle we have, that's why I'm so big with strength training, is because the more muscle we have, the more we can clear that glucose out of our bodies. Even when we go out with our friends and we have one of those big cheat meals, we have a good time. We could handle that glucose more when we have more muscle. Really big with strength training. And I do believe in the cardio too, absolutely. If you're running or walking or cycling, don't take your foot off the gas pedal of that. But I do really suggest strongly that we do some strength training too, because you can get a lot of those benefits of cardiovascular aerobic type workout with strength training as well. So exercise snacking, this is the how-to guide, and I just got a few of these on here because I think most of y'all are a lot smarter than I am, and you could really figure out, probably you could improvise better than I could. There's all kinds of things we can do. I'm just going to kind of cover most of the basic ones. This is one of my favorites because some of us really can't leave our workstation and we just can't do some of the things we're talking about. And I love this exercise. You hear me talk about this one a lot, don't you? Because you can do this when you're cooking. You can do this when you're doing things, but body weight squats are really great. And I got a list of just some of the most powerful things they do for our body. They improve cardiorespiratory fitness, which is a big determinant of longevity right there. It builds lower muscle strength, keeps us from having sarcopenia, which we've talked about before, and we need those muscles. Activates large muscle groups to help clear that glucose. That's what this gentleman is doing right now. And also improves our posture. You know, just getting up from sitting and doing some exercises like that right there. It's just really good for our whole body, for our musculoskeletal system. I like this one because this is just kind of neat, you know, to see somebody do their tricep dips. Because this is something, well, in the gyms, of course, I don't use a chair, but I do these exercises when I'm in the gym. And to think that I can do the same exercises and I don't have to be in the gym, this is a great exercise for the tricep. I don't have a good way of showing exactly what she's doing. This one I do a desk push-up. And remember, she's been sitting, so she gets up and she's just moving. This is just breaking up that prolonged sitting any way we can. This is a good one. I really like this one because we gave away some bands. And if you'll notice, there's nothing really special about that band. It looks like the ones that we've used before where you can go by and cut them up. So she's made her a really good leg extension. I thought that's pretty neat. So maybe some of you all who are watching or here could, you know, come up with some other good ideas to share with us, some good exercise snacks that we can start incorporating. I really like that. Now the first place prize, and this is in my humble opinion, I think this is the greatest one I'm about to show you. If you're willing to do it, and we all got access to this, most of us, I think, here on campus do, that's stair climbing. When I was researching exercise snacks, I was looking at all these studies where people were walking or even cycling. The most profound results come from this one right here. And it makes sense. You exert more energy. And I even got, I'll tell you how much I like this one. That much right there. These are all the results that I wanted to research, what all it does. That's, you know, been shown in studies. Build stamina. So climbing stairs it will make us gasp and struggle for our breath initially, but we will build stamina and strength in our bones and muscles when we do it consistently. So it is uncomfortable, but we get some really great benefits from climbing the stairs. Improves our heart health. A significant benefit of climbing stairs is that it improves our body's maximum oxygen consumption, VO2 max. And that's the maximum amount of oxygen our bodies can consume, which is a big determinant of longevity as well. And it boosts our cardiorespiratory system. Strengthens our muscles and joints. As a vertical exercise, stair climbing pits the climber against gravity, thus enhancing our muscles and skeletal strength. Boosts mental health. This is a big one. This simple workout refreshes our mind. I know it's not fun when we're doing it, but if you think about it, when we get done, we feel so much better. And there's a reason why, because it gives us an adrenaline rush and stimulates the production of hormones that produce happiness. Decreases risk of mortality. Stair climbing reduces our resting heart rate. And I believe the heart has a certain amount of beats, and we want to, throughout a lifetime, and we want to decrease those. And decreases our bad cholesterol and lowers mortality risk. Tones our lower body. Stair climbing is effective core strengthening and body toning exercise. Y'all can see how much I like stair climbing. Increases calorie burning. As our bodies moves through resistance of every step we take, it helps our body burn fat rapidly. So I am really big with stair climbing. If you're willing to do it, now I'll go back and say, if you just want to get up and just walk or do some of the simpler ones, that's good. It's better than just sitting there is what I've been really wanted to try to hammer today. So in summary, there is some research that suggests snacking on exercise may be as effective as a longer and more traditional workout. My suggestion is this. I'd like to see some more research on that statement right there. I did see some that said that, I'll repeat, doing these exercise snacks is as good as doing, like, say, your 30 or 45 traditional. Like I said, I'm just not really there yet because I'd like to see some more data on that. But this is my suggestion. Keep doing the 30, 45 minutes an hour, whatever aerobic type exercise that you enjoy. Incorporate these exercise snacks into that plan to break up that prolonged sitting that we just talked about, which is so bad for us. And I know it's so easy in our occupations. I think this has been a really good presentation to bring this to light to some of us. And any questions?
This is a stupid question, and I thought about it a long time, but I've never looked it up. It wasn't worth it. People would always say, well, you know, you should eat celery because it takes more calories to chew and digest celery than in it.
Mhm.
Do you know that?
It's not true. There's
I didn't
no
think it
food
was,
that
but I
puts.
never looked it up. to see.
No, ma'am, there's no food. I've been listened to that on a podcast one time. There's no food that puts us in an energy deficit from eating it. That we're going to get some. Now, it would be probably insignificant, the amount of calories that we would get, but no, man, that's not true. And I remember hearing that as well.
Yeah, people would always say. that. The other thing, I was just gonna make a comment because you made this a strong point in there. And I'm involved in a long-term, I think it's a 30-year cancer study.
Yes, ma'am.
And today I received my, I get periodic surveys to fill out just about my health behaviors and what I'm doing. And I got one today, and it specifically was asking me in 24 hours, how long are you sitting? How long are you doing? It was all about this very thing, wanting to know how much I sit and how much I move and how often I'm vigorously exercising and how often I'm doing basic, walking to the mailbox. And then how much sitting I'm doing, active sitting, like working, but also inactive sitting, like watching TV or looking at my phone. And that's all this survey was about, was specifically sitting versus being active.
Isn't that interesting?
And it's a cancer related study. So
And you noticed the presentation was exercise snacks, but I talked more about the prolonged sitting because when I did my research on this for a class, that's what I got out of it. I saw more on the prolonged sitting. Every article I read about exercise snacks, they talk more about the prolonged sitting than they did anything. It just makes a lot of sense.
I've heard prolonged sitting referred to as the new sitting.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I was really careful today to not throw out everything I heard because a lot of it, there's no research on it. Like I even read that it was the new smoking. I don't believe that. It's hard for us to ever put anything with smoking, As bad as it is, I'm not there. And also I had to be real careful because I read a vast majority of things and a lot of it, I had to look and see what would the research say, what was the data about that? So, the things that we did discuss, I'm pretty much there on most of it, except for the things I told you that, as far as, well, let's just not do a 30, 45 minutes no more. We can just get up and walk. I don't know if I would suggest that. There's something about that potent, I call it a drug, a potent longevity drug. It's good for us. About, when we leave the camaraderie, maybe with after work, when you go work out with your friends.
Well,
It's too potent.
Craig, you know more about this because you do more exercise research, literature reviews than I just don't do much of it. But you also would wonder, if your heart is supposed to be in a training effect.
Right.
If it's still the 15 or 20 minutes, the exercise snack is not going to be that long.
Exactly.
So you would still need to do those unless I know there's been research to look
Yes,
at
ma'am.
the aerobic effect because your heart rate will go up
Mm-hmm.
going up and down the step for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But is that comparable to 15 or 20 minutes of sustained elevated heart rate exercise?
Yes, ma'am.
And so I think you're right. It seems to me the need is still there for more prolonged
I'd like to see
aerobic bouts as well. But it does make me think, would the strength training
Mhm.
aspect be the same? You know, like if I took, every time I took a break, I was just doing bicep rep exercise.
ma'am.
And then the next time I took a break, I did squats, and the next time if I could, over the course of the day, get a full body strength training workout,
Mhm.
would that be the same as going to a 45-minute, do it all together?
I'd have to answer that right now, in my humble opinion, and it's just an opinion, and I could be wrong. I usually am 22 times a day. But I believe just when it comes to strength training, going to the gym and having that, as far as getting the maximum benefits that we're talking about from building our muscles, I believe in going, at least having something where you're working your whole core. And we got to remember too, when we start working out, we get stronger and we need to progressive overload.
Right.
So I agree with you 100%.
Questions from the online audience? But I did have a comment, and I talked to Craig about this, and if we were walking around campus. My coach recently, we've been talking about how I'm in my internship and how I'm doing a lot of sitting. He suggested that he does it all the time.
Mhm.
He calls it walking meetings.
Yes.
So like, if you can, like, obviously you don't have to have much technology, like if you're meeting about a certain subject or something like that, going out and just walking outside, with that person you have to meet, even if you have to keep your notes on your phone,
Right.
have that as a way to, get out of the office, kind of, so you're not sitting down talking to that person, you're actively like walking and getting that exercise in as well. It's just still being productive.
And you get some fresh air.
And you get some fresh air.
Mhm. Vitamin
And
D.
the sharper, you can sit in a
Yeah.
warm meeting and be
Yes.
And
sleepy
get
and have a hard time
sleepy
paying
and-
attention.
Yes, yeah.
Well, not if you're walking around.
Yeah,
You're so
yeah.
pretty alert.
That's a great point. And I could foresee that being kind of the future of where we're headed. And I hope so, because we all know, I don't think I brought any groundbreaking news today, but I think the best thing we can do is just put this right here. Put it where we're all thinking about it on a daily basis, because we all know getting up and moving is good, sitting is bad. But to be reminded of, I could forget all the time. I've been sitting for 45 minutes or longer, into a work or something. That's a good.
But I think it's helpful, Craig, the fact that you talk about all the health. I mean, not that like, you don't need to sit long, you should get up and move around. But the benefits of doing that throughout the day, there's a lot of real benefit to it that I imagine most people, including myself, didn't know how beneficial it is to just get up and take a walk up to the department and back, or a walk to Stevens or whatever, how important that is.
Dose of exercise medicine.
Yes. Regarding stairs,
Yes, ma'am.
Craig, so that was your number one. You said that's the number one. So I go up those stairs
We all do down here.
every day.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, some days it's a lot, like
Mhm.
last Wednesday for the
Mhm.
cooking demo, I went up and down
Mhm.
those stairs probably felt like 50 times. But, and so you said consistently, if you're doing it consistently, that it does get easier. I'm just gonna tell you, it just hasn't gotten easy for me yet. And I don't know why, I'm always out of breath when I get to the top of the stairs, and I work out every day. I'm doing strength training now. I'm a major walker, not necessarily a walker all the time with stairs involved, but in terms of my neighborhood. At what point, like, do I need to be going up and down those stairs like every single day, 5 to 10 times a day to make it easy, or what? I
It
just
won't
want to
ever
get
be
to,
easy.
I just want
Dr.
to.
Riffo said
And not be like.
That's why it's number one. It's number one. You're not the.
Yeah, trying to go up the 3 flights. And God forbid if I forget something.
Oh, yeah.
Because my office is on the second floor of Billingham, so it's, and usually I forget I'm on the
Yeah.
third floor of Frankfurt, so it's down 3 flights of stairs, cross, into Billingham, up a flight of stairs, down a flight of stairs, all right. And by then I'm like, okay, class is over, y'all.
Yeah.
It's like telling you anything.
Oh,
Yeah, exactly. So, and my student athletes will come in if I'm on the third floor, and they're like, they're carrying stuff, and they're huffing and puffing, and I'm like, okay, I feel a little better
Right.
about myself,
Yeah.
but those stairs
They're tough.
I think that says more about the stairs. You know, that's a great point you make. I think, my opinion, again, which my opinion, $2 won't get you a cup of coffee, but I believe it says more about how great stair climbing is. That we never get, so we,
Challenges.
exactly, we can all walk. And
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you, if we can just get people to do anything, that's good, better than sitting. But if you want to turn it up a notch, that's why I had this one on here, as far as I think it's really great.
Try those.
Yes, ma'am, and we will never be like, not with the
Yeah.
stairs I want, but
Yeah.
that's good though. I think anything that gets us, it doesn't make much sense to me that something makes me feel that bad can make me feel that good when it's over with. It's kind of like when we run or something,
Yeah.
how you feel when you're done.
As long as I know it's a good thing.
Yes, ma'am, it is. And I could keep going while it's good. It's low impact on our knees.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. That's good to know.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, there's not anybody that works on this campus that doesn't have access to stairs somewhere.
Exactly.
Honestly, there's so many
Exactly. We have
stairs
a lot
on
of
this
stairs. And if you really want a challenge, try the one in back of Flowers Hall.
Behind the
Behind the
baseball
baseball
field.
field.
That's a
That one is the
Now,
toughest.
that's a.
They're like this tall.
Yeah.
And they lean back.
And they lean back.
Their
Those
pictures
are
Mhm.
weird.
Those
Yeah,
are
we have
rough.
to
Straight
take
up.
the army